Hi, everyone.
Hello. Page 307 of In Search of Christian Freedom. Ray takes up the principle of Romans chapter 13, verses 8 to 10, where he sums up the substance of the law by saying love is the law's fulfillment. Ray goes on, Paul exemplified this approach in his handling of problems. One notable example is that of the issue of eating meats offered to idols, one of the four things listed in the letter recorded at Acts chapter 15. In Corinth, some Christians were even going to idol temples where such sacrifice meat was thereafter cooked and served up for a price in the precincts of the pagan temple. For a Christian to eat there was, in the eyes of many of their fellow disciples, particularly those of Jewish background, undoubtedly comparable to the way Jehovah's Witnesses would view it if one of their members today were to share in a church supper consisting of food earlier blessed by priests and served at, let's say, St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cathedral in New York, with the money payment going to the church. Though the viewpoint might be comparable, the issue itself was far more serious. How then did the apostle deal with the matter?
Did he threaten those eating this meat by warning them of judicial proceedings and probable disfellowshipment? Was his appeal to law, a body of rules, as a means for curbing this practice? To the contrary, he showed that the action of itself was not condemnable, but it could produce undesirable, even tragic consequences. Counseling on the basis not of law but of love, he writes at 1 Corinthians 8, 1-12, and the translation that Ray quotes is from the Phillips Modern English Bible.
It is easy to think that we know over problems like this, but we should remember that while this knowing may make a man look big, it is only love that can make him grow to his full stature. For if a man thinks he knows, he may still be quite ignorant of what he ought to know. But if he loves God, he is the man who is known to God. In this matter, then, of eating food which has been offered to idols, we are sure that no idol has any real existence, and that there is no God but one. But this knowledge of ours is not shared by all men. For some, who until now have been used to idols, eat the food as food really sacrificed to a god, and their delicate conscience is thereby injured. You must be careful that your freedom to eat food does not in any way hinder anyone whose faith is not as robust as yours. For suppose you, with your knowledge of God, should be observed eating food in an idol's temple. Are you not encouraging the man with a delicate conscience to do the same? Surely you do not want your superior knowledge to bring spiritual disaster to a weaker brother, for whom Christ died. And when you sin like this, that is, by a misuse of Christian freedom, and damage the weak conscience of your brethren, you really sin against Christ.
That was the end of that quote. And then Ray continues, whether one ate or did not eat would not depend, therefore, upon law and concern over being found guilty of violating law. It would depend upon love and concern, not to harm one's brother, for whom Christ died. Truly a superior approach that caused the Christian to reveal what was in his heart, not simply his compliance with a rule. That same counsel demonstrates as well that the apostle did not look upon the decision reached by apostles and others in Jerusalem, recorded in Acts chapter 15, as being law. Had it been law, Paul would never have written as he did to Christians in Corinth, stating frankly that the eating of meats offered to idols was a matter of conscience, with the determining factor being whether the eating would cause others to stumble or not. To view the Jerusalem letter as law, and on this basis to claim that its reference to blood indicates that Christians remain under the Mosaic law ordinances regarding blood, is clearly to ignore Apostle Paul's statements in corollary matter of meats offered to idols, showing that such reasoning is invalid. If no stumbling was probable, then no one could rightly judge Paul or any other Christian for eating such meat. As Paul states in 1 Corinthians 10:29, 29, sorry, yeah. Quote, "For why should it be that my freedom is judged by another person's conscience? If I am partaking with thanks, why am I to be spoken of abusively over that for which I give thanks?" End of quote.
Christian freedom should never make one insensitive to the conscience and scruples of others. At the same time, no person has the right to impose his or her conscience on others, thereby placing limits on the freedom in Christ these enjoy. Nor does any group or select body of men, casting themselves in the role of exercisers of apostolic authority, have the right to impose their collective conscience on others, handing down the decrees on that basis.
In the previous chapter, the distinction between law and precept was given, the one deriving its strength through imposition by authority, the other conveying principles through teaching. Jesus regularly taught by parables, stories that laid out no laws, but brought home forcefully precepts, vital moral lessons. The parable of the prodigal son does not set forth a law that one must take back one's wayward children, have a feast for them, and so forth. But it emphasizes a loving spirit, a generous, merciful outlook. In the scriptures we find a combination of methods employed. There are positive injunctions, true, but there are also accounts setting forth approved modes of life, living in love, maintaining peaceful relations with others. There are responses to highly contextual questions. Paul, for example, answers a number of these, but clearly does not do so as establishing law, but as giving sound spiritual counsel designed for the particular question at issue.
And in the footnote on that same page, Ray again refers to Paul's way of dealing with sexual issues in Corinth, because this passage we just read from 1 Corinthians 8, 1-12, about idol worship and meat offered to idols, etc., is also from the same letter. In Corinthians, he deals with sexual misconduct in a way that is not legalistic. So here's what he says. With regard to sexual immorality or fornication in some translations, also listed in the Jerusalem letter, we remember Acts 15 also has this prohibition. The apostle nowhere presents this as something that might be either right or wrong, depending on whether it might cause stumbling. He evidently viewed it as having no justifying factors. Yet neither is a legal ruling presented as necessary for the Christian to recognize the need to avoid sexual immorality. As Paul observes at 1 Corinthians 6, 13-19, if the person is guided by the law of love, he will find it inadmissible, recognizing it as a misuse of his body, which is joined to Christ. So I don't want, as I did when I first read that, to think, okay, Ray's not saying, therefore, sexual immorality is all right.
Or is a matter of conscience.
Right. He is recognizing, though, that Paul saw sexual immorality differently than he saw the conscience issues of should you eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols. That's not a prohibition anymore. It's now a conscience issue, right? Where he seems to regard fornication, the violation of the Bible's sexual conduct strictures, as being different, and therefore something that you had to be strict with yourself about. And yet he doesn't justify apparently judicial action against violations of this principle, except in the one case. Yeah. Again in Corinthians, right?
The one that he puts a ruling kind of down, if you want to say that, or he writes a letter saying, look, this isn't even kind of behavior that the world would consider permissible.
Impermissible, that is.
Yeah, they thought this was just outrageous, what was the behavior of this man. So why would we be casual about it?
So he advocates for judicial action against a man who is flagrantly violating sexual rules, or if you like, principles,
Norms of
society altogether, like
Yeah.
the man who is living with his father's wife.
Yeah.
Whereas with fornicators, there's no example we have of him saying disfellowship such ones, although the counsel is very clear.
Yeah. Flee from fornication. But it's counsel.
Yes, he
It's
says
spiritual counsel.
in the same passage that Ray cites here, 1 Corinthians 6, he says, no other sin is a sin against your own body. And in Romans, he makes the same point. So in the next section, which we'll get to in the next video, Blood and Life, Law and Love, that chapter comes to a conclusion. And the heading at the beginning of it is how genuine is the unity achieved by legalism. And then another heading under the same subject, the last heading in the chapter, is the blessing of Christian freedom. Next time.